Hello, my name is Viana Ridge. I was a federal judge for over 20 years. Respected, trusted, unshakable in a courtroom. But none of that mattered at my own family dinner. My son raised his glass and said I was nothing. He smiled as if I hadn't sacrificed my life for his. As if my presence at that table was just a formality, an inconvenience. What's worse, his boss, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, stood in front of a room full of executives the next day and called me ma'am. Why is it that strangers remember what your family chooses to forget? And what happens when you've been silent so long? They think you've disappeared. The front door was unlocked, but no one came to greet me. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the kitchen, too polished, too rehearsed. I stepped in slowly, my heels clicking against the gleaming floors of Silas's perfectly curated home. Everything was deliberate here, each object placed not for use, but for display, like I'd walked into a model home. Like I wasn't supposed to touch anything. I set the pie down on the counter, unsure whether to announce myself. Callista spotted me first, turning from the marble island, wine glass in hand. Her smile was as thin as the gold chain on her neck. "You made it," she said, voice half warm, half obligated. "Silas didn't think you'd show." "I was invited," I answered, adjusting my scarf. She took a sip and walked past me, murmuring, "Well, it's a full house tonight. We had to get creative with the seating." Her tone lingered like the scent of her perfume, expensive, invasive. I followed the sound of voices to the dining room. There were more people than I expected. Colleagues, friends of Callista, some from Silas's firm. He was in the center of it all, confident and gleaming in that too-tight navy suit he wore when he wanted to impress. He stood, raising a glass. "I just want to say, I built this. No handouts, no legacy, just me." There was a ripple of polite applause. Callista rested her hand on his arm, proud. One guest leaned toward him and said, "It's rare to see someone rise above the noise like you have." I said nothing. My seat was at the far end, like an afterthought. I reached for my water, kept my eyes on the centerpiece. Then he looked over. "My mom's here, too," he added, as if I were an accessory someone had left on a coat rack. "She's retired. Didn't do much, but she means well." Laughter, quiet but sharp enough to cut. Someone chuckled. "Behind every mediocre son, right?" I caught myself. I didn't flinch, didn't reach for my purse. I just kept folding the napkin in my lap again and again, like that would hold me together. No one looked my way. Later, as plates were cleared, I offered the dish I'd brought, Silas' favorite as a boy, southern rice pie, still warm. "Oh, you brought food?" Callista said, blinking like it was a foreign concept. Silas took one glance at the dish and pushed it aside. "This isn't a potluck, Mom." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was complicit. No one spoke. No one defended. The servers passed by, replacing wine glasses, refilling others, skipping mine entirely. I watched their forks move, the laughter resume, and understood. This wasn't my table anymore. Maybe it never had been. I excused myself and walked out to the patio. No one noticed. The air was cool, that soft Texas breeze brushing past my shoulders like an old friend too polite to mention how long it had been. I leaned against the railing and stared through the glass at the scene inside, my son surrounded by people who didn't know how he cried the first time he skinned his knee. How he once clung to my leg on the first day of school and begged me not to leave too quickly. "Stay just one more minute, Mom. Wait by the door." and I always did. Now I watched him from the other side of the glass, laughing without me, alive in a world he designed to exclude me. I opened my purse slowly. The zipper caught a little, like it knew what I was reaching for. From the side pocket, I pulled out the old name badge, cracked at the corners, the lettering slightly faded. Judge Viana Ridge, United States District Court. I hadn't worn it in years, but I never stopped being her. My fingers trembled around its edges, but my grip stayed firm. I looked at my reflection in the sliding glass door, older, yes, but intact. They erased me from this dinner, but they forgot. I still write the closing statements. Saturday evenings in downtown Austin have a way of making everything feel like a performance. I arrived early, a habit from years in courtrooms where punctuality meant dignity. The hotel's chandeliers glinted like they'd been polished just for show. As I stepped into the lobby, my heels echoing on the marble, no one looked up. No staff ushered me in, no name called out. At the registration table, a young woman scanned the list twice, then looked up at me like I didn't belong. Name? She asked. Viana Ridge, I said, already knowing what would follow. She hesitated, whispered to another woman beside her, then scribbled my name onto a blank badge with a ballpoint pen. No title, no printed label like the others. Table 17, she said. That way. I followed her finger toward the edge of the banquet hall, past the glowing center tables, draped in navy and gold. My table sat tucked between the kitchen doors and the hallway leading to the restrooms. The floral centerpiece was smaller. The silverware mismatched. The name cards were handwritten like mine. I hung my coat behind my chair, folded it carefully. I looked around and realized I was overdressed for this corner of the room. No one at my table noticed me sit. As the main event began, Silas and Callista sat center stage at a long table, elevated slightly above the others. A spotlight grazed their faces. They looked like they belonged in a brochure. At my table, the conversation danced around regional sales figures and minor office gossip. A woman with red lipstick and perfect posture turned to me. "Who are you here with?" she asked with a kind smile. I smiled back, slow. I used to know the man at the podium. Her brows raised slightly, and she nodded as if that explained everything. The lights dimmed further as Silas rose to speak. He looked every bit the self-made executive. His voice held that polished tone he adopted when trying to impress without sounding eager. "I'm grateful to those who shaped me," he began, "my mentors, my father, my professors, and of course the family who taught me discipline." He paused, scanned the room. His eyes passed over me like headlights skipping a shadow on the pavement. "Callista's mother, your resilience inspired me," he added, tipping his glass toward her. She beamed. There was a gap, a space where my name could have lived. He moved right past it. I didn't blink. I didn't adjust my posture. I simply placed my fork down and folded my hands in my lap. He didn't forget. He chose silence. The applause was polite. I saw Callista squeeze his hand under the table, saw him smile like he'd just finished composing a great symphony of self-praise. I thought back to the night before, his casual cruelty in front of strangers. And now, this. 2 days, 2 stages, same intention, erase me without saying the word. I glanced at my name badge again. Viana Ridge, it read. No judge, no mother, just black ink on curling paper. Table 17's number card had a coffee stain. The bread rolls arrived cold. My entree was served 15 minutes after everyone else's. None of it was an accident. It was design. Silas didn't need to shout. He only needed everyone else to look the other way. As he wrapped his speech, Callista took the mic with a practiced grace. "Behind every great man is a great team," she said, "and I'm proud to be that." Laughter, polite, conditioned. I rose from my seat, slow, pushed back the chair, without noise, walked calmly toward the restroom hallway. Not to cry. That phase passed years ago. I looked in the mirror, steadying myself under the fluorescent lights. My reflection was the same as last night. Older, yes, but no less solid. "You forgot, Silas," I said quietly. "I never taught you how to lie well." Sunday began the way only quiet mornings do, slow, still, and indifferent to the noise that came before. I woke before the sun fully rose, the light sliding in through the slats of the blinds like it didn't want to bother me. I moved quietly through the kitchen, not out of habit, but because noise felt unnecessary. There's a certain reverence in silence after humiliation. The coffee machine gurgled, a sound I'd come to associate with some form of comfort. I poured a cup and held it between both hands, letting the warmth soak through skin that used to write rulings and now just gripped memories. Tucked behind the mixing bowls in the back drawer was an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. I carried it to the table, sat down, and opened the cover. Silas, at 17, all limbs and awkward smiles, in his graduation gown, the way his cap sat slightly crooked on his head. On the next page, there I was, young, in a dark suit, standing in front of the courthouse gripping a leather briefcase like it was armor. He had no idea who I was in that photo. His smile back then was real. Mine was controlled, knowing. My fingers lingered on the edge of the page, and for a moment, I missed both versions of us. Years back, I juggled two jobs, one that demanded my mind, and one that demanded my humility. The courtroom taught me strategy. The diner taught me endurance. On a cold Tuesday night, after a closing shift, I missed the last bus. There weren't taxis in that part of town, not ones you could afford on a server's wage, so I walked. 2 miles in, my legs gave out, not from weakness, but from everything else. I sat down on a stone bench outside the train station, pulled my coat tighter around me, and made it a pillow. One night, I told myself, just one. Silas needed to start at Cornell the next week, and the final tuition payment had to clear. I'd made the deadline by sleeping on granite and praying no officer would move me along. That bench was colder than I expected, but it was a bed, and for a mother, that was enough. I sipped my coffee now, the memory tasting sharper than the brew. Back in the living room, I stood before the bookshelf. It was time. The frames were layered. Silas' framed MBA diploma sat proudly in the center, tilted just right under the reading lamp. I reached behind it, dug through the forgotten clutter. I found my federal appointment plaque, covered in dust, the seal tarnished. When did I decide my success belonged in the shadows of his achievements? I took down his diploma and set it aside, not with resentment, but clarity. I wiped down the surface of my award and placed it on the shelf, side by side with his. For once, equal, not a mother's gesture, a woman's. We mothers are taught to make space, to step aside, to clap without being invited on stage. But no one ever tells us when it's time to stop doing that. Sometimes we forget we're allowed to take the spotlight back. The doorbell rang, slicing the stillness. I opened the front door to a breeze and a stack of mail sitting neatly on the porch, Mostly flyers, bills, another real estate postcard from a neighbor trying to sell, and one thick envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Return address, Dorian, Alcott. My hands didn't tremble this time. I stepped inside, placed the coffee on the counter, and opened the envelope with calm fingers. Inside was a letterhead, formal and elegant, but the words weren't stiff. Judge Ridge, we would be honored if you would deliver the keynote address at the Pinnacle Annual Strategy Conference, not as a guest, as a voice that shaped the foundation on which we now build. It wasn't an invitation to attend. It was an invitation to speak. The office was colder than I remembered, not in temperature, but in tone. Everything about Pinnacle's lobby gleamed, glass, brass, and calculated warmth. I'd been invited for a walk-through and an informal sit-down with Dorian Alcott about the upcoming keynote. But this wasn't a hallway made for reminiscing. It was a shrine to revisionist history. While waiting for Dorian, I wandered toward a corridor labeled Legacy Wall. A string of framed moments lined the length of it. Milestones, mergers, executive promotions. I stopped before one oversized print with a black matte border. The Granger Legacy, the caption read. There stood Silas, 25, clean-shaven, confident. Beside him, his father, smiling like he had anything to do with the man Silas became. And of course, Callista, already styled like she ran the building. I looked for myself in the photo. I was at that event. I remembered the shoes I wore, the hair clip that wouldn't stay in place. But I wasn't there. Another frame showed the annual family retreat. Spouses, kids, staff. No me. Not even a blurred background face. My existence had been curated out. It wasn't just absence. It was deliberate omission. History isn't always written by the winners. Sometimes it's edited by the ungrateful. Dorian's assistant spotted me from around the corner and jogged up, clipboard in hand. Judge Ridge, I'm so sorry. I meant to reach out before. We were supposed to play your video message at the banquet. I raised an eyebrow. It wasn't. He nodded, sheepish. Callista pulled it last minute, said it didn't align with the updated program flow. He extended a USB drive, careful, like it might explode. This is the copy we were given. Thought you might want it back. I took it, turned it over once in my hand, and slid it into my purse. I don't need it back, I said. My tone was soft. My spine wasn't. He opened his mouth to say more, thought better of it, and stepped away. I moved toward the private elevator. No one stopped me. The badge on my chest still read consultant, but I walked like I owned the floor. Inside the elevator, I pressed the top button and let the silence settle. Silas's office door was open. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the scent, expensive cologne and citrus polish. Everything was arranged just so. Photos lined his shelves, Callista shaking hands with CEOs, Silas at ribbon cuttings, signed thank you notes from junior staff. There were awards, not one of them mine, not a trace of who helped pave the way for his resume. No certificate in the frame from the courtroom I spent years serving. No picture of the check I wrote for his first semester when he couldn't secure aid in time. I placed my purse down on his leather couch, straightened it and stood in silence. When did my son become so allergic to where he came from? I wasn't there to reclaim space. I was there to confirm a suspicion, and now I had. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. I stepped out and nearly bumped into Dorian. He blinked, then smiled wide. I didn't know you'd arrived. I came early, I said. Thought I'd look around. I hope what you saw wasn't discouraging. It was clarifying. He tilted his head, uncertain. Still glad you'll be speaking. They need to hear your story. I met his gaze. It's time I spoke, not as someone's mother, but as someone who remembers what's been forgotten. His smile didn't fade. Then let's make sure they listen. The elevator chimed softly as the doors opened onto Pinnacle's executive floor. I stepped into the hallway, crisp heels against polished tile. Dorian's invitation had been formal, but I knew better than to expect a welcome committee. The meeting room door was ajar. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Callista stood at the front of the room, gesturing toward a whiteboard filled with bullet points. Her voice was crisp, as if she'd been speaking non-stop since sunrise. Half a dozen young associates sat around the conference table, nodding like disciples. She glanced up and paused. "Judge Ridge," she said, with a quick flick of her wrist toward the clock. "Didn't expect you this early. We're setting up for the next panel." I scanned the screen behind her. The schedule was projected in full view. My name was nowhere. Not under speakers, not under contributors, not even a footnote. They hadn't forgotten. They'd chosen to leave me out. I walked to the far end of the room and took a seat. The conversation around me didn't resume. The temperature dropped a degree. A few minutes later, a young intern in a too-tight blazer approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," he whispered, leaning closer. "Are you the former nanny? I was told not to seat you too close to the CEO." I tilted my head slightly, eyes steady on his. "I'm the reason the CEO sits where he does today." He blinked, unsure if I was joking. Before he could ask anything else, Silas entered the room. He heard the exchange. He paused, and then he walked past us both like nothing happened. The intern vanished. Silence returned. I waited. The meeting resumed. Slides changed. Metrics discussed. I let them finish before I stood. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't need volume to cut through noise. "You've redrafted your origin story," I said calmly, "but forgot who signed the first chapter." Eyes turned. Callista stiffened. Silas shifted in his chair. I looked at Dorian. I came to observe, but perhaps it's time I contributed more than silence. No one interrupted me. In the quiet that followed, I stepped out with Callista trailing me into the hallway. We stood by the glass railing, overlooking the lobby. "One more attempt to erase me," I said slowly, "and I won't speak as a mother. I'll speak as a judge." She said nothing, but her jaw tensed. Silas stepped into the hall, just behind us. I turned to him. "This isn't about making me proud," I said. "This is about reminding you where you came from and what it cost to get you here." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence had already said enough. I picked up my bag and walked away. Not quickly, not angrily, just done pretending I was lucky to be invited. As I passed through the doorway, I caught Callista's voice behind me. "Pull everything she ever submitted," she muttered to an assistant. "I want to know her blind spots." I didn't turn back. I didn't need to hear more. Silas stood still, watching. They're building cases. They forgot I already know how to win them. The boardroom at Pinnacle wasn't unfamiliar, but it had never felt this alert. It was early Tuesday morning, and the room was already filled with quiet typing, low conversations, and the thick air of competition. Suits sat in neat rows, coffee in one hand, performance metrics in the other. I entered through the glass doors alone, no announcement, no introduction, just the sound of my heels, deliberate, unhurried. Silas caught sight of me first. His surprise was thinly veiled. Callista looked less surprised, more disapproving. Like a socialite watching a guest sit at the wrong table at a fundraiser. Several executives exchanged glances. I said nothing. I didn't have to. My name was already on the agenda, placed there weeks ago by Dorian himself. The silence around my entrance was their choice, not mine. The meeting started with slides and performance charts, talk of margins and markets. When the air grew too comfortable, Silas took the floor. He motioned toward me casually. "This is my mother," he said with a grin. "She used to help around the house, sort of our behind-the-scenes operator." There was a chuckle, not loud, but enough to measure complicity. Before I could respond, Dorian stood. His voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. "That's Judge Ridge," he said clearly. "Former federal judge. She helped draft half the legislation you're now using for your compliance structure." The laughter died mid-breath. A few heads turned toward me, expressions shifting. From the far side of the room, someone muttered, "Yes, ma'am." I didn't flinch. I let the pause settle, like dust. "Respect," I said, "isn't about memory. It's about who you become when others try to rewrite you." Silence. Not uncomfortable. Corrective. Dorian stepped forward again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we're honored to have with us someone whose work laid the foundation for much of what we now call innovation. Judge Ridge will be joining us for the rest of the session." All eyes turned. I walked to the front, not as anyone's mother, but as someone who had shaped their playing field long before they knew it existed. I began speaking. I spoke about policy, about precedent, about systems that withstand the stress of time and ego. I made no mention of Silas, no nod to Callista. They weren't part of the message. When I finished, I looked up. Some nodded slowly. A few scribbled notes. Others just sat still, taking in the inversion of what they thought they knew. Silas stared ahead, pale. He didn't interrupt. He didn't smile. Callista typed something quickly into her phone. I didn't care what. I closed with one sentence. You can't erase someone who knows where every copy of the original lies. As I stepped down, the applause was brief but sincere, not performative. The meeting dissolved into small talk and folder shuffling. I gathered my materials, ready to leave. Near the door, I heard Callista lean toward Silas and whisper, "She just gave your boardroom a new compass." He answered softly, "We need to change course, fast." But I kept walking. From behind me, a voice, young, hesitant, called out, "Ma'am, thank you for showing us who you are." The room was quieter this time. No laughs, no side conversations, no one pretending to check their phone just to avoid eye contact. I took my seat at the far end of the long table as Dorian finished arranging his notes. Unlike the previous day, there was no effort to mask the tension. This wasn't theater. It was revelation waiting to land. Silas was already seated, flanked by Callista, both of them staring ahead, pretending they weren't nervous. But their silence was loud, and for once, it worked in my favor. Dorian began without preamble. "Before we dive into operations," he said, "I'd like to share something personal, something foundational." All heads turned. He reached beneath the table and pulled out a worn manila folder. 25 years ago, he said slowly, when I was a broke student with no family support, someone I barely knew co-signed my first federal loan. That person was Judge Vianna Ridge. You could hear the breath suck from the room. I didn't move. I wouldn't be here if she hadn't believed in me. And frankly, some of you wouldn't either. No one laughed this time. Callista shifted slightly. Legs crossed the opposite way. Silas dropped his pen and didn't bother to pick it up. Dorian held up a letter. "This is a copy of that loan sponsorship," he said. "Dated, signed, stored in my safe all these years." I recognized the document. I remembered signing it in a courtroom hallway, balancing coffee in one hand and the hopes of two young men in the other. Dorian hadn't just repaid the loan, he'd paid forward the acknowledgement. I looked at Silas. His face was unreadable, but his hands betrayed him. Fingers clutched too tightly, knuckles whitening. Callista's eyes met mine like flint, but she said nothing. Her game was numbers and image, and this wasn't a boardroom she controlled anymore. I finally spoke. "I didn't do it for gratitude," I said, "but I won't stand by while someone rewrites truth into fiction." There was no heat in my voice, only clarity, the kind that slices cleaner than anger ever could. Around the room, something shifted. Younger associates leaned forward. One woman whispered to another, "She's the reason we even have the cyber division." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Dorian smiled quietly and nodded toward me. "It's easy to forget who built the floor you're standing on until it starts to shift beneath you." Silas stared at his lap. Callista tapped furiously on her phone. I sat still, letting them feel the weight of what had just been returned to the room. My history, my voice, my name, on record. The luncheon ended not with applause, but with reverence. People left the room slower, more deliberate. As I gathered my things, Silas moved toward me, voice low. "Why now?" he asked. "Why expose this?" I looked at him, not with anger, but with a long memory. "Because you used my silence to build your story," I said. "Now I'm telling mine." I walked out, the sound of my steps echoing in a room full of rearranged truth. The ballroom pulsed with music, laughter, and clinking glasses, everything meant to signal celebration, but I could feel the weight behind every polished accent and polished shoe. Thursday night, the final gala of Pinnacle's annual conference. This was their grand closing act. I entered through the side entrance. My name was printed on the program now, finally in ink. Beneath it, former federal judge, though they still hadn't bothered to confirm my speech slot. I wore my navy blazer, the one with the judicial pin. Not for them, but for me. The last time I'd worn it in a room like this, people stood when I entered. My assigned seat was once again next to the catering doors. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the place card and moved it. The nearest unassigned table sat 3 rows from the stage. I placed the card there, took my seat, and let them notice on their own. They didn't. The gala progressed like clockwork. Speeches, awards, toaster, oven, applause. Then came the presentation of the closing gift to Dorian. Callista took the microphone. Of course she did. "This next item," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "was specially selected and gifted by the Granger family. A token of tradition, scholarship, and honor." An attendant walked forward, holding an antique law volume, leather-bound, rich with age and history. I blinked. That was my book. I'd wrapped it in brown paper tied with navy string. The edges had been worn by my own hands over decades. Dorian opened it. His expression didn't change, but his hands stilled as he unfolded the note tucked inside the cover. To the only mentee who remembered where he started. In my handwriting, the room fell into a brief pause, but Callista kept smiling. Silas looked down, hands locked between his knees. No one spoke to me. I didn't expect them to. After dessert, some tart thing with too much garnish. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically. I stood like someone who knew she'd already said enough without saying anything at all. I walked over to Dorian. He stood, quietly, extended his hand. "You don't need to correct them," I said, "but they'll know." He nodded once, just enough. I turned, walked down the length of the hall. No spotlight followed me. No toast was called. I reached the double doors and pushed them open. The music faded behind me. The air outside was cooler than expected, a clean, unedited breath. Inside, I imagined the confusion starting to ripple. She just left? Was she even supposed to be here? Why didn't anyone acknowledge her? Some would look for the program, see my name. Some wouldn't. In my car, I started the engine and pulled into the night. Headlights washing over empty asphalt. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. They took their last chance to do the right thing and used it for themselves. At the red light, my phone buzzed against the console. Unknown number. The message read, "Would you consider speaking at Harvard?" I smiled, not out of pride, but out of recognition. Some doors close with a slam. Others you lock from the outside on your way out. The scent of cinnamon and strong coffee drifted through my kitchen as the sunlight filtered in, soft through gauzy curtains. 2 months had passed since the gala, and the silence that followed felt earned, not empty, not bitter, just whole. Odessa sat at my table, stirring her tea like she had done in every season of my life, always showing up without asking if she should. Beside her, a young woman named Harper listened intently as Dorian recounted an old court hearing. Harper was a law student from Harvard who'd flown in to meet me after seeing my speech on a streaming platform. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. The world had turned its head, not because I demanded it, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for them to do so. My living room shelves were fuller now, not with trophies, but with memory, framed photos I had once hidden. The bench plaque Dorian had mailed me, a black and white snapshot of Silas and me, him still in braces, holding a paper certificate from a local writing contest. I left one chair open at the brunch table, not out of hope, out of intention, a reminder. I hadn't heard from Silas, not a call, not a card. Callista, however, had posted an article on Pinnacle's blog titled Legacy and Reinvention. She wrote of honor, growth, and family without names. Not once was I mentioned, but I knew what that omission cost her. Sometimes silence is the apology. Sometimes it's the final act of erasure. I scrolled through the post's comments and found a reply from a junior analyst I barely remembered speaking to. "Your mother is the real legacy." I smiled at the screen, just once. As we cleared the table, Dorian reached into a leather folio and handed me a wooden frame. Inside was a yellowing letter, the one I had written to his university's bursar office 25 years ago, pledging my name for his student loan. "I wanted it where my board could see it," he said. I looked at the frame, then at him. "Thank you," I said, but we both knew it wasn't about my ego. It was about anchoring the truth. That evening, as dusk settled over the porch, I sat alone, wrapped in a shawl I'd stitched myself the year Silas left for college. I thought about the versions of me that had come and gone: mother, judge, invisible guest, keynote speaker. I didn't want to go back to who I was before the dinner. I didn't want restoration. I wanted recognition, and not even from others, but from myself. They thought I left quietly, but I never needed noise to make an impact. Just then, the doorbell rang. Not a knock, A bell. On my doorstep sat a box. No return address. Neatly wrapped. Heavy. Inside was the antique law book, the same one I had chosen, wrapped and watched be falsely credited to someone else. Inside the cover was a note. I unfolded it, read the first line slowly. I was wrong. The handwriting was familiar. I don't expect you to forgive, but I needed you to know. Silas. I closed the book gently, no tears, just breath. I stood, walked to the shelf beside my federal appointment plaque, and placed the book between it and the photo of me and young Silas on the courthouse steps. Then I sat back down and let the quiet settle around me. This time, it was peace. Looking back, I've learned that silence doesn't mean surrender, and walking away doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is standing firm in your own truth, even if no one claps for you. We spend so much of our lives trying to be heard. But the real power comes when you know who you are. No introduction needed. Have you ever been written out of your own story, only to realize you never needed their approval to write the ending? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever walked away from something or someone without apology? Let me know in the comments. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button, comment 1, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't speak to you, I'd still love to hear why. Was it timing, tone, or truth? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories that speak from the heart, and to it, your voice matters. Let's keep this conversation going. Characters 700.